In this video, you're going to hear a wild story of how one man turned the tables on his HOA with a move so bold, it left the entire neighborhood speechless. You'll get the full breakdown, from the outrageous fines to the ultimate revenge that changed everything. So make sure to watch until the end to catch the unbelievable twist. Trust me, it's worth it. Thank you for your comment. I really appreciate the support. If you want to help the channel grow, it takes less than a second to hit like and subscribe, and it truly helps more than you know. Now, let's get back to the important and necessary information. They say no good deed goes unpunished, but in my case, no long driveway goes unnoticed. It was a crisp Tuesday morning. I was sitting on my porch with my usual black coffee, watching the mist curl off the pavement like slow-moving smoke. Just peaceful, until I saw the envelope. It wasn't just any envelope. It had that dreaded HOA emblem on the top, gold-stamped and smug-looking. Inside, a notice. Dear Mr. Casey Granger, our records indicate that your driveway exceeds a permitted length under HOA Regulation 6.4b. You are required to correct this violation within 30 days or face daily penalties. My driveway was too long? Mind you, this wasn't a newly built mansion or some flashy billionaire retreat. I'd lived here for 12 years. The driveway had always been the same. The city had signed off on it. Even the previous HOA president once parked his RV on it during a storm. I stared at the letter, wondering if it was some kind of prank. But no, this was real. And then came the real kicker, a fine of $100 a day, starting immediately. At first, I tried reason. I called. I emailed. I even walked into the HOA office with my original permits in hand. No one listened. No one cared. That's when I decided if they thought my driveway was a problem, I'd turn it into something they'd really have to deal with. Something big. Something alive. Something unforgettable. A farmer's market. I stood then in my driveway for a long while, that letter crushed in my fist like it could make the nonsense go away. My driveway. Too long. For years, that stretch of pavement had been my pride and convenience. In spring, I'd line it with flower pots. In winter, it was wide enough to plow without hassle. My niece learned to ride her bike on that driveway. My dog learned to fetch there. It was part of my home, my rhythm. But now, the HOA had decided it was a problem. At first, I figured it had to be a mistake. Maybe someone new on the board had misread something. Or maybe they were just going down a checklist looking for violations to justify their existence. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I tried to clear it up. I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter. Voicemail. I left a message. No call back. I emailed the compliance department with scanned copies of my city-approved plans, highlighting the driveway dimensions. No reply. I even walked into their office during open hours, only to be met by a thin-lipped woman at the front desk who looked at me like I'd just tracked mud across her marble floor. Sir, you'll need to submit a formal appeal, she said, not even glancing at the papers I brought. You can drop it in the gray box outside. But this is a mistake. It's not even a new driveway. It's been here since. Sir, the process is clearly outlined in your covenant documents. She handed me a copy, like it was a Bible, and I was a sinner, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't about a rule. It was about power. Over the next week, I received 2 more notices, each one colder and more impersonal than the last. The fines were stacking up. $700, then $1,200, then $1,800. I wasn't the type to panic easily, but the numbers made my stomach twist. I'd worked too hard for my home to lose it over something so ridiculous. And yet, I started noticing something else patterns. My neighbor Linda, who'd planted a small tomato patch by her mailbox, had been fined for improper landscaping. The Andersons, who had kids and left bikes out sometimes, got a warning about visual clutter. Even old Mr. Davenport, who could barely walk, was fined for trash can misplacement because his grandson forgot to roll them back one day. This wasn't just me. The HOA had turned from a neighborhood committee into a mini dictatorship, and they were cracking down on anything that didn't fit their image of cookie-cutter suburbia. So I stopped trying to fight them with logic. Instead, I got creative. It was on a rainy Wednesday morning, walking the length of my too long driveway, that I noticed how wide it really was, how smooth the pavement had stayed after all these years, how, with the right shade, tents, and signage, it could host something. I thought about Linda's tomatoes, the Anderson kids' homemade lemonade, the retired couple a few blocks down who sold honey from backyard bees. And then it clicked. What if the driveway wasn't a problem? What if it was a solution? I pulled out my phone and texted 3 neighbors. What would you say to a Saturday pop-up market on my driveway? No cost. Just bring what you've got. The replies came fast. Linda, yes. I've got herbs and jars of homemade sauce. Tom, from down the block, I'll bake bread. Let's do this. Elena, finally, a reason to leave the house. Count me in. That was all I needed. I rolled up my sleeves, dug into the garage for old folding tables and chairs, and got to work. The HOA might have thought they were backing me into a corner, but they just gave me a platform. And this driveway, it was about to become the most popular stretch of pavement in town. The morning of the first market was damp with anticipation and a little dew. I was up before sunrise, running on nothing but determination and a stubborn sense of justice. The air smelled like soil and hope. A thick mist curled around the base of the hill, blanketing the edge of the road like a secret waiting to be revealed. I had never hosted anything before, not a yard sale, not a block party, not even a barbecue. But I wasn't thinking about logistics or turnout, or whether this would technically violate some unspoken HOA code. I just knew this was right. By 7 a.m., Linda pulled up in her little hatchback. The trunk popped open, revealing baskets of fresh rosemary, basil, mint, and her prized jars of sun-dried tomato sauce. "You're serious about this?" she asked, half laughing. "I'm serious enough to risk a fine," I said. "They want to charge me for this driveway? Then they're going to have to fine all of us." She grinned and unloaded the first crate. By 8 o'clock, we had 6 tables lined up. My niece painted a wooden sign that read, "The Driveway Market," with little pumpkins and sunbursts around the lettering. I tied it between 2 chairs at the top of the hill. Soon, more neighbors began trickling in. Elena brought knitted scarves and earrings she made by hand. Tom rolled up with baskets of warm sourdough bread and cinnamon buns that made the whole driveway smell like a bakery at Christmas. 2 teenagers set up a table of succulents in recycled jars. Even Mr. Davenport, cane and all, showed up with a fold-out chair and a crate of homemade birdhouses. And people came, not just from the neighborhood, but from nearby streets. Passers-by slowed their cars. Some parked and walked up, curious and smiling. There was laughter, chatter, even music from a Bluetooth speaker, someone connected to an old-school playlist of 60s rock and 90s pop. Kids ran around with cookies in hand. One little girl was selling lemonade for $1, and I bought 3 cups just to encourage her. It felt like the kind of community people always talk about missing, but rarely do anything to create. And it all started because of a fine. That afternoon, while I was restocking cups of apple cider and helping a neighbor untangle a string of hanging lights, I saw them, 2 members of the HOA board. They didn't walk up with baskets. They weren't smiling. They wore matching polos and mirrored sunglasses, like security guards at a mall nobody wanted to be in. Margaret, the president, approached with her clipboard held tightly like a weapon. Behind her, the treasurer, a younger guy named Blaine, tried to look like he wasn't embarrassed to be there. "Mr. Granger," she began, eyeing the tables in a happy chaos with thinly veiled disdain, "I believe we've already notified you that the structure, this driveway, does not comply with HOA standards." "Structure?" I asked. "You mean the driveway I've had for 12 years? Margaret sniffed. "And now you're using it for commercial activity. That expressly forbidden under Article 12, Section 3. I pointed toward the crowd. "You want to tell Linda over there that selling herbs to her neighbors is a criminal act? Or maybe Tom, who brought extra loaves for your husband?" Blaine blinked. "My husband, Yes, I said. He bought 3 this morning. Margaret's lips tightened. You're in violation, she repeated. And you're forgetting the First Amendment. I replied, freedom of assembly. This isn't a business. It's a gathering, a community event. Margaret fumed but didn't have a response ready. So instead, she said, you'll be hearing from our legal department. Then I'll see you in court, I said with a smile. And that was it. They turned, flustered, and stormed off, heels clicking sharply as they descended the hill. But it didn't end there. By sundown, the market was winding down. People packed up, kids helped fold chairs, and someone brought by leftover cupcakes just because. I stood by the mailbox with my hands in my pockets, watching the last of the crowd wave goodbye. The first market had been a success, a big one. But what really stuck with me, what made it impossible to go back, was the look on people's faces. A kind of joy that came from being seen, welcome, connected. This wasn't just about a driveway anymore. This was about taking back our neighborhood from a group that had forgotten what neighborhoods were for. I had no idea that this little spark would catch fire, but it had. And the HOA, they had no idea what was coming. The Monday after the driveway market felt different, a calm before the storm. I woke up early, poured myself a cup of strong coffee, and sat on my porch like I usually did. Only this time, I noticed more neighbors out and about, waving, smiling. A couple even stopped to say, great job on Saturday, like I had just hosted a summer fair. But that calm didn't last long. By 10 a.m., an envelope was taped to my front door, bright yellow with red lettering that screamed notice of violation. Inside was a formal complaint from the HOA. The wording was thick with legalese, but the message was clear. Unauthorized commercial use of residential property. Repeated disregard for HOA compliance policies. Hosting an unpermitted event that drew outside traffic and disrupted community peace. Penalty, $5,000 fine, and threat of lien, $5,000. I laughed at first, a real bitter laugh. But the more I read, the more I realized they weren't bluffing. They wanted to make an example out of me. I wasn't just a resident anymore, I was the rebel, and that scared them. That same afternoon, I met with a few neighbors in my backyard. Linda, Tom, Elena, and Mr. Davenport came over, each carrying snacks like it was a block party. We spread out the letter on the patio table. This is war, Tom said, shaking his head. They've lost their minds. They're trying to break you, Elena added, because they know what you started is working. It's not just about me, I said. They're scared of all of us coming together, because once we do, their power doesn't mean anything. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling in. That's when Mr. Davenport spoke up, quiet but firm. Then let's not stop. Let's double down. We all looked at him. What do you mean? I asked. He leaned forward. Don't cancel the next market. Make it bigger. Invite more people. Set up music. Get the local paper involved. If they want a battle, we don't give up, we organize. The fire in his eyes caught us all off guard, but it lit something in each of us. We didn't just want to resist anymore. We wanted to stand. So that's what we did. By Wednesday, we had a flyer made. The driveway market, week 2, community edition. We posted it in every group chat, pinned it to bulletin boards at the local coffee shop. Even slid a few copies under doors in neighboring subdivisions. And the buzz? It grew. Neighbors offered tents, tables, even acoustic performances. One guy volunteered to bring a food truck. A local high school band asked if they could play. Linda got permission from a small produce supplier to sell surplus veggies. Even people who'd never spoken to each other before were suddenly trading numbers and sharing ideas. It was as if one small act of defiance cracked open a vault of connection the HOA had been keeping sealed for years. And the HOA, they noticed. On Friday, the threats escalated. We got letters warning of trespassing fines. They posted laminated signs near my yard saying, commercial activity prohibited by HOA order. A board member even drove by twice, camera phone out, snapping pictures like we were criminals. But it didn't stop us. Saturday arrived, and the market was twice as big. Cars lined the street. Kids were painting pumpkins. A violinist played near the honey stand. Local reporters showed up with cameras and started interviewing people about what was happening. The headline on Sunday would read, "Neighbors turn HOA fine into a full-blown festival when community beats control." That day, I realized something crucial. This wasn't about the HOA anymore. It was about freedom, about standing up when something feels wrong, about not letting small-minded people bully you out of your own life. Later that night, after the music faded and the tables were packed, I sat in the driveway with Linda and Tom. We were tired, sunburned, and full of too much lemonade and community pride. "I think they're going to try and shut us down for real next time," Linda said. "I know," I replied, "but we're not alone." Tom leaned back and looked up at the stars. "This driveway, it's the most alive it's ever been." We sat there, quiet and smiling, as the last string of lights flickered in the breeze. But deep down, we knew the fight wasn't over. The HOA was about to hit harder, and we were ready. The victory felt sweet for about a day, maybe two. But when Monday rolled around, reality set back in. I woke up to a phone call from a lawyer that the HOA had apparently hired to put an end to my little rebellion. His name was Adam Wells, and he was the kind of lawyer who spoke with authority, like a man who had spent a decade shredding people's dream for a living. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Holloway, I represent the Westview Homeowners Association." He began, his tone all business. "We have been instructed to pursue legal action against you for defying multiple community guidelines. I suggest you cease your activities immediately or face a lawsuit." "Define what guidelines?" I shot back, my heart racing. "You mean hosting a neighborhood market? You can't seriously be suing me over that." "Oh, we can and we will," Adam said flatly. "And if you think this is just going to be a slap on the wrist, I suggest you reconsider. The HOA has resources and we don't lose." He hung up before I could say another word, and I stared at the phone screen in disbelief. The audacity. But this wasn't the first time the HOA had overstepped their bounds. I had to think fast. The next morning, I called Linda, Tom, and Mr. Davenport to come over. We had no choice but to meet this threat head-on. "I've hired a lawyer," I said, sitting down at my kitchen table, "and we're going to hit back." Mr. Davenport leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Simple," I said. "We're going to do the one thing they didn't expect. Fight fire with fire. We'll use their own rules, their own systems against them." "I don't know much about legal stuff," Tom said, "but it sounds like they've got us cornered." "That's what they want us to think," I replied. "But here's the thing. HOA rules aren't as clear-cut as they make them out to be. I'm betting they're full of loopholes." The next week, we sat down with a lawyer I'd found who was known for challenging powerful organizations and advocating for residents' rights. His name was Diana Fields, and she was an expert at winning cases that had seemed impossible. Diana was calm, collected, and straightforward. "The HOA has a pattern," she said as we sat around the conference table, going through the paperwork. "They go after people who don't comply, and they expect you to just give up. But they've made a huge mistake by targeting you. You've got leverage." "Leverage?" I asked, confused. "Correct. We'll dig into the rules. All their rules. We'll see how many of them are actually enforceable in court, and we'll find the inconsistencies." Things escalated fast. After receiving several letters from Diana, the HOA board issued a notice. Mandatory community meeting. Wednesday at 7 p.m. I knew exactly what that meant. They were calling for a showdown, and they thought it would be the final nail in the coffin. But they underestimated the people of Westview. When Wednesday night came, I could feel the tension in the air. Linda, Tom, and Mr. Davenport came with me, ready for whatever was about to unfold. We walked into meeting hall to find a room full of HOA supporters, most of them older residents who had always played by the rules. But scattered among them were a few familiar faces, neighbors who had stood by me since the beginning, showing their silent support. I stood up when my name was called. The HOA's board members were seated at a long table, their eyes cold and calculating. The lawyer for the HOA, Adam Wells, sat next to them, smirking like he already knew the outcome. But this time, it wasn't just me standing alone. Diana Field stood behind me, her confident presence filling the room. Mr. Holloway, my client stands firm in his right to use his property as he sees fit. The HOA has no legal grounds to impose fines or punishments for hosting a community market. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, the HOA president, Margaret Hawthorne, spoke up, her voice dripping with condescension. Mr. Holloway, she began, this is about much more than a market. It's about maintaining the integrity of this community. Your actions are disruptive, and they undermine the very foundation of what Westview stands for. Disruptive? I shot back. You mean community building. I didn't see any of your members in the newsletter last week talking about how we're fostering local business and giving our neighbors a chance to connect. Maybe you should read what the people actually want. Margaret stiffened, clearly taken aback by my boldness. She shot a look at Adam, who began scribbling something on his legal pad. Diana, ever calm, stepped forward. We're asking for transparency. If you want to enforce rules, show us the evidence. Which specific regulations have been broken? And how are those rules even applicable to my client's actions? The room fell quiet again. It was clear that we had turned the tables. The HOA was no longer the only voice in the room. People were starting to listen to what we were saying. As the meeting progressed, more neighbors began speaking out in support of my market. Mr. Davenport, Linda, and others voiced their concerns about how the HOA was micromanaging their lives and stifling the creativity and spirit of the community. By the time the meeting ended, something had shifted. The HOA couldn't control the narrative anymore. The board had no choice but to back down. The community had spoken. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of celebrations, community events, and a new understanding that our neighborhood wasn't just a collection of houses. It was a place where neighbors could thrive together. The HOA had lost, and for once, we were the ones in control. The victory didn't just feel like a personal win. It felt like the entire community had been liberated from the oppressive grasp of the HOA. Word spread fast through Westview about what had happened, how one person stood up, rallied others, and won. But that victory came at a price. The HOA wasn't about to let a single defeat derail their sense of control. They quietly regrouped, rethinking their strategy, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Meanwhile, life on the block had never been more vibrant. The market, once a small weekend project, now blossomed into a monthly festival. Local artisans set up booths, food trucks lined the streets, and kids ran around with painted faces and balloons. The sense of community was palpable, and the connection between the residents deepened. The energy was contagious. However, even though the streets were filled with laughter and chatter, there was an underlying tension. The HOA was still lurking in the background, trying to find a new way to strike. It didn't take long for the HOA to make its next move. They weren't going to challenge me directly. Instead, they focused on smaller issues. They began cracking down on minor violations. People who parked on the wrong side of the street or left their trash bins out for too long were now getting letters. These weren't just any letters. They were threatening notices, complete with fines. The HOA wasn't fighting me anymore. They were trying to divide and conquer. They started picking off residents one by one, breaking the sense of unity that we had fought so hard to build. I couldn't let that happen. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about keeping the community strong. I called a meeting with my neighbors. As usual, Linda, Tom, and Mr. Davenport showed up, and soon the others gathered, too. One by one, we discussed the new HOA tactics. Each of us had received one of those threatening letters. The HOA's goal was clear: break our unity, isolate us, and put an end to the market. But we weren't backing down. We're not just going to let them win this time, I said, looking around the room. We got the power of numbers, and we need to stand together. Tom, always a practical one, spoke up. I agree. We've already seen that the HOA doesn't have all the answers. If we act as a group, they'll have to reconsider. Linda nodded in agreement. We've already proved they don't have control over us. It's time to fight back again. We need to push back on every fine, every letter, and make sure they know we won't be intimidated. I looked around the room, Seeing the faces of my neighbors who were all in, we weren't just fighting for my driveway anymore. We were fighting for the entire community. Diana Fields had become a trusted ally throughout the last battle, so I didn't hesitate to contact her again. We explained a new strategy the HOA was using small fines to target individuals, hoping to break the spirit of the community. Diana listened intently, then gave us a plan. It was brilliant. "We're going to file a class action lawsuit," she said calmly. "Not just for you, but for every resident who has received one of these letters. We'll show that the HOA's tactics are illegal, and we'll bring this into the public eye." It was a bold move, but it was also our best shot at shutting down the HOA's oppressive tactics once and for all. The class action lawsuit sent shockwaves through the HOA. They had been operating under the assumption that they could continue their tyranny without any real consequences. But now, they were up against dozens of residents who had all joined forces, with a lawyer who had the skills and experience to take them down. The legal proceedings took several months, but the community stayed strong, supporting each other along the way. We attended rallies, wrote letters to local newspapers, and made sure our voices were heard. As we gathered more support, even more residents came forward. Many of them had been too scared to speak up at first. The HOA had made them feel like they had no choice but to comply, but now they saw that we weren't afraid to fight back. With each passing week, the momentum grew. Eventually, the HOA found themselves in a tight spot. They had underestimated the strength of a united community. The court date arrived, and Diana Fields, along with a team of lawyers, stood ready to take on the board. The courtroom was packed with residents. The energy was palpable. On one side, the HOA lawyers, and on the other, the United Front of Westview. The judge, a seasoned professional with a reputation for fairness, listened intently to both sides. Diana, as always, was calm and collected. She laid out the case, how the HOA's tactics were not only legally questionable but morally indefensible. The fines were unfair, their enforcement inconsistent, and their actions aimed at stifling the very heart of the community. But what really turned the tide was the testimony from the residents themselves. One by one, we took the stand, speaking about our experiences with the HOA, how they had tried to manipulate, control, and intimidate us, and how, despite their best efforts, we stood together. After days of testimony and deliberation, the judge delivered a ruling that shocked everyone. The actions of the HOA are not only unjust, but they also infringe upon the rights of the residents. The fines are to be voided, and the HOA will be prohibited from taking any further punitive action without due cause. Additionally, the HOA is to compensate residents for their undue stress and harassment. It was a victory for justice, for the community, and for everyone who had stood their ground. We had won. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board resigned and new, more reasonable leadership took over. The residents of Westview finally had a say in how their neighborhood was run. The market continued to thrive, and the community grew even stronger. The victory had done more than just stop the HOA. It had ignited a sense of empowerment among the residents. We had learned that when we stand together, we are unstoppable. As for me, I never took my driveway for granted again. But more than that, I had learned the value of unity and how much we can accomplish when we fight for what's right. The HOA had tried to take control, but in the end, it was a community that emerged victorious.